Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base biotech podcast, and this is number 69, and it's going live on July the 24th. Last week our guest was Kyle Cordova, founder and CEO of Aquaporo. This week we have conversations with LinusBio founder and Mount Sinai environmental professor, Dr. Manish Arora, as well as with Philippe Chambon, CEO of Cyllene Therapeutics. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address you can use if you're interested in advertising with us, or sponsoring a podcast episode, or for event coverage. Normally at this point we would run through the news you may have missed over at deeptechdigest.com over the past week, but that list would be a bit shorter than usual this week because there hasn't been as much news, so I think we'll just skip it this time and get right to the interviews. And so first up this week is a company that changed its name recently to Cyllene Therapeutics. We'll find out why shortly. It's a global leader in non-replicating HSV-1 vector technology in neurology, and it is currently running a study in the US with its lead DNA medicine candidate, EG110A, in patients with neurogenic detrusor overactivity, neurogenic bladder-related incontinence. The CEO, Philippe Chambon, can tell us about the company, what it does, and the name change.
Yeah, the company Cyllene Therapeutics was started in late 2019 based on technology developed in a bunch of European universities led by Université de Versailles Saint-Quentin. The initial goal of the technology was to solve a major problem of spinal cord injury patients, which is really what affects their bladder function. And that's the second major cause of discomfort for those patients and of morbidity after their spinal cord injury. So they come up with the idea that given that the reason for those bladder problems are sensory neurons dysfunction, that having a tool that enables you to silence those sensory neurons would be very interesting. And that led them to start the development of non-replicative herpes vectors as the tool to deliver the necessary payload inside sensory neuron of the bladder to shut down the activity of the one that were misbehaving. And so that's what led to the creation of the company and the initial work. And then what we've done since late 2019 is, of course, pursue the development of this first vector that silences those sensory neurons, which are all, called type C sensory neuron, and they are CGRP positive neuron. And then in parallel, as we were pursuing the development of this, we broaden really the application of the technology platform so that we are the second company after a US-based company called Crystal Bio, pursuing non-replicative herpes vector, but our application are purely in the neurology field, while the application of Crystal are for epithelial disease. So that's kind of the general background. Our first product entered clinical study in man in 2025. We got fast track designation by the FDA, and the initial result of our phase 1b/2a were really very strong, very nice safety profile, and a major reduction in the number of incontinence episodes in these patients that last at this stage in the initial patient over 12 months, which is what we were aiming for, is with this type of treatment, get very long-term duration of action, and that's what we're seeing right now. The name of the company came about because we had the prior name was EG427. People wanted something that was easier on the tongue and easier to remember, and that's led us to the choice of Cyllene Therapeutics. And Cyllene is the Greek mountain, which in Greek mythology is the birthplace of Hermes. And the name of our technology platform is Hermes. So it's kind of a nice genesis for the new name of the company.
And speaking of that connection with Greek mythology, could you tell me about the Hermes platform?
So the Hermes platform is stand for Herpes Modular Expression System. This is because we've developed those non-replicative vectors, which are basically, you have to think about it about as vectors that can only infect the first cell they enter in. They cannot propagate, they cannot replicate themselves. So it's really purely a vessel to enter into neurons, and in the first neuron they encounter, express the transgene that we insert into them. So we built that platform as really a modular kit where we can insert transgene in various places in the vector. We've shown that we can put 3 different transgene. We've shown that we can express some transgene short-term, other transgene for long-term period of time. And to build a new vector from start to having the vector validated in vitro takes us about 6 to 9 months.
And could you tell me a bit more about your candidate, EG110A?
Yeah, EG110A is the first vector. It's the one that is in human clinical trial in the US. That one, in fact, codes under the CGRP promoter in a region that allows for really long-term expression. It codes for an intracellular enzyme that degrades a protein called VAM2 in neurons. And VAM2 is an essential protein to the ability of the neuron to have the synaptic vesicle merge with their membrane. So if you destroy this protein VAM2, you block the ability of the transfected neuron to communicate downstream. And that's how we block those CGRP positive sensory neuron ability to trigger motor neuron and then muscle contraction. So we validated in animal study that by inhibiting those neurons, we were indeed showing significant decrease in abnormal contraction of the bladder. Now that we're in human, we now have proof in human that indeed we see a decrease of more than 80% in the frequency of bladder incontinence episodes. So a very massive reduction in those episodes of incontinence. And now we're continuing exploring various doses, and we're also preparing to develop what the phase 2/3 program should be to enable us to register the drug.
And in terms of the condition or one of the conditions that you're looking at, could you tell me a bit more about neurogenic detrusor overactivity?
Yeah, the first study we did is in what is called neurogenic detrusor overactivity in spinal cord injury patient. And neurogenic detrusor overactivity is a condition, it's an abnormal reflex loop of the bladder that emerges when your central nervous system lose the ability to repress the contraction of the bladder. And of course, you have that in spinal cord injury patient. You also have this in MS patient, in Parkinson patient, in any patient where you have significant deterioration of the ability of the brain to communicate with the spinal cord. And that neurogenic bladder translates into abnormal contraction of the bladder that lead to urinary incontinence episode. Those can also lead to increased pressure in the bladder that then can damage the kidney themselves. It also is a source of urinary infection and so on. So it's a significant source of morbidity and, in fact, mortality through urinary infection in those patient population. And we choose as a test case for our product the spinal cord injury patient because they are the one in which the disease is the most set. So that way we had a good baseline to look at what number of episodes of incontinence they had before our treatment and what do they have after treatment and for how long.
And could you tell me about your approach to genetic medicine?
The big challenge with therapy in the neurology field, to speak at high level, is the ability to develop drugs that are truly local in their mode of action and don't have a broad distribution and hence the side effect link to systemic distribution. And if you look at wholesale of the small molecule in neurology field, they have this type of problem. They have significant side effect because of the systemic distribution. And because of that, you cannot, in fact, get to maximal efficacy because you have a side effect profile that is not good enough. So our goal with those type of vectors that do not distribute systemically, in fact, they are vectors that are large enough that when you inject them, they really stay around the point of injection. They don't distribute into other tissues and so on. And it's around that point of injection that they find the nerve termination and go into those nerves to go and express the relevant payload. We have a very targeted approach that really enables us to insert, if you want to think about it this way, an app into the operating system of certain subtype of neuron in a very targeted basis. If you think about it, which I find fascinating, the current product is injected in the bladder wall. It's multiple point of injection. And our target with that mode of injection is 7,000 neurons. Those are the neurons that control the pathology of neurogenic detrusor overactivity. It's only 7,000 cells. That's what we need to target. So you need to have tools that are extremely focused in order to be able to stay at that level and not get out of the bladder into other tissues and so on.
Could you tell me about your clinical trials and where you're currently at on that pathway?
Yes, we have this phase 1b/2a trial is ongoing at 4 centers in the US. We've dosed the first 2 cohorts of patients. We are doing the final dose as we speak. This final dose is in fact lower than our 2 first doses because the results were strong enough from an efficacy perspective that we did not need to go higher. So the last dose that we're exploring is a lower dose. And in parallel to that, we're starting the process of initiating discussion with the FDA to decide what type of phase 2 and 3 clinical program we need to have in order to successfully potentially register the drug. And that clinical trial is a total of 16 patients. With those 10 patients with a safety profile that has been truly remarkable because the only thing we have seen is in a small number of the patients, we've seen low-grade fever and nausea right after around the time of injection that disappeared quickly, similar to what some people get when they get a flu injection in the arm. As I said, we saw very nice efficacy.
And so where did the clinical trials go from here?
It goes to discussion with the FDA and then the EMA also to define what the registration program should look like, so that we can start those clinical study in the latter part of 2026.
And so what else do you have in your pipeline?
Right behind this, we have a second product for the pain field. There's a class of drug that mimic the activity of GABA. GABA is a neurotransmitter that calms the nervous system. There's a balance in the nervous system between glutamate and GABA. Glutamate is excitatory, GABA is inhibitory. And there's a series of conditions where people are taking GABA-like type of medication with various level of efficacy, but also which is not that great in terms of efficacy and also significant side effect. So our second product, in fact, is a product that converts glutamate into GABA at the local level, and hence has application for neuropathic pain, the various types. So we have shown in an animal model very nice pain relief. Now we are doing the work that needs to be done so that we can bring this product into human in, we hope, 2028.
Are there many companies working on non-replicating HSV-1 vector technology, or?
It's surprisingly so. There are, in fact, only a small number of companies working with those type of vectors. There is Crystal Bio in the US focused on epithelial application. We're the second company, in fact, in human clinical trial based on this type of technology, and the first one in the neurology field. And there are 2 or 3 other companies that are pursuing those type of vectors that are further behind in preclinical studies.
Is that because it's difficult to use, or what's the reason?
Yes, but in the sense that it's really the progress in the molecular biology tools of the last 10 years that has enabled to manipulate easily those type of vector. Those vectors are large. They have about 152 kb of genetic material. So it's another advantage because we can put a lot of insertable gene in them, but it means that you need to be able to manipulate those type of large vector. You need to be able to produce them effectively and so on. And that took time. And now we're at the stage where the tools to do that are very efficient. Manufacturing production technology is stable, and you can produce them now at cheap cost of goods.
With the clinical trials that you're doing, what are your hopes for patients? Are you looking to be able to cure conditions that you're working on or make them
Uh,
manageable?
we expect to show very strong efficacy for long period of time. I wouldn't say cure because we don't know what long period of time really means. But it's what we've already seen is a very strong efficacy lasting more than 1 year. So now we need to watch the patients.
Does that mean that you'll have to do repeat dosing?
In fact, it's funny you asked that because the FDA has allowed us to do repeat dosing in those patients after 1 year.
That's good news for the patients. What about the delivery method? Is that just injection?
It's an injection like a lot of other drugs, and so it's small volume that are injected in the target organ. In the first indication, of course, it's the bladder muscle.
And I guess recently you raised 33 million euros. Could you tell me about that and what that would
Yeah.
be used for?
So we raised a Series C round of 33 million euro that really enable us to broaden the base of investor in the company by adding 2 investors that have interesting characteristics. One is Gordon MD, who is a crossover/public investor in the US. So it brings the first truly late-stage investor in the company. And the second one is M Ventures. So it's the venture arm of Merck, Germany. So it's our first strategic pharma investor in the company. So that completes very nicely the story before we go into a significantly larger raise at some point later this year or early next year, based on the feedback of the FDA that we will have by this late fall on what clinical program we need to have to be able to have a registerable product.
Where do you see the field of targeted DNA medicine heading?
I think overall, the type of result that we've achieved is good news for the field of gene therapy overall. Because if you look at the progress that Crystal has done, what we're showing, we are demonstrating that you can use gene therapy as an effective delivery method to achieve a very strong efficacy effect from a local standpoint. So I think that's overall good news. And as far as we're concerned, we have work for at least the next 20 years in terms of the type of project that we can evolve in based on the technology. So there's no shortage of disease target on which we hope that we'll be able to have a medically important impact.
Right. And you mentioned 20 years of work. How do you prioritize that?
For example, the first product, EG110A, is a product that silences the activity of certain type of sensory neuron, which are the CGRP positive neuron. And CGRP inhibition is a well-known mechanism of action, for example, that is being used in the field of migraine, trigeminal pain, and so on. For us, we applied this CGRP inhibition in the bladder field because it was the best way for us to achieve proof of concept. So we choose the first indication based on the probability of achieving proof of concept, and then we choose other indication around that once we know we have potentially a drug, then we can go into other indications that are potentially larger indication population with the different risk profile and so on. So it's the way we approach the thinking through each product and then also across products. So we look for places where we believe there's a strong underlying rationale for our technology to target a given mechanism of action at a truly local level.
And have you thought about the actual rollout and commercialization part of this yet in terms of being able to scale up, that kind of thing?
Yeah, we started, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot more work to do. We have established a very good relationship with the CDMO that manufacture the product for us. So we have line of sight on commercial manufacturing. We have an understanding of the cost and so on. We've also started to do extensive market research on positioning of the product, but there's much more work to do.
Are you hoping that this will be something that could go global eventually?
Clearly, it's a product that affects disease that are global. We are initially doing the clinical development in the US, then we'll extend to Europe, and that will be for 2027. And after that, we need to think about the rest of the world, in particular Asia, and with Japan being front and center there.
Is there anything that you wanted to mention or talk about that we hadn't covered?
It's good to see that the biotech market is feeling much more constructive this year than it was in 2025. So with more good news, I think the industry will continue to thrive.
Some impressive work going on there at Cyllene Therapeutics, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more from them in the future. Speaking of hearing more from a company, it's a repeat for us for the next interview, and I don't mean that we've run it before, but we have featured LinusBio on the podcast before, and they are back again because they have a fascinating new product called Traced. It's the first direct-to-consumer wellness test that uses a single strand of hair to provide a day-by-day view of exposure to 15 elements, including nutrients like zinc and magnesium, as well as toxic elements such as lead, arsenic, cadmium, and aluminium, or aluminum, over the course of 30 days. Joining us is Manish Arora, LinusBio CEO and founder. It's great to have you back on the Base to Base podcast, Manish. Thanks for joining us. So for those who didn't hear the previous interview, could you give us a bit of background on the company?
My name is Manish Arora. I'm the founder and CEO of LinusBio. We are a company that is taking robotics and AI into the world of environmental monitoring, how to improve people's environment, and generally their wellness. All of this work is based on the science that I did as professor and vice chairman of environmental medicine at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine here in New York.
All right. And so what is Traced?
I'm so glad to be on your show and so delighted to talk about the latest product we have launched called Traced. You know, our environment is so important for our health and well-being. For the past many decades, we've focused largely on the genes and genetics, but we also know that environmental factors are equally, if not more important. But we really haven't had access to tools and products that can map our environment. And because our environment fluctuates every day, I would say even every hour, we really need tools that don't just give us a snapshot of what our environmental exposures are, but give us a whole timeline. And so Trace addresses those major problems. It's the most comprehensive analysis of exposure to elements or metals, and it just doesn't give you one snapshot in time. It goes back an entire month. The good thing is it's all from a single strand of hair collected at home with scissors, no pulling, no pain, no going to clinics, no needles, no trying to freeze blood and ship it. So all of that is taken out. It's all from the comfort of your home. And we give you a daily timeline of your exposure over a month. Plus, we also give you exposure guidance. What that means is we give you things that you can do at home, actions that you can take that will help you improve your household environment.
Now, I have to ask this question. It's audio only, but you and I are both shall we say, follically challenged. How would we participate in that?
And for your listeners, he's what Jim means is that me and Jim are bald, but we have beards, but we shave those beards off, then we would both be identical twins to a boiled egg. However, you don't need a lot of hair, you see. And I think you and I could grow 1 centimeter at the back of our head. So even you and I can take part in this test. But yes, having some hair on your head is a prerequisite to being able to do this test.
Would it work on facial hair or?
We are looking into it. Even example, eyebrow hair, which is everybody has an eyebrow pretty much. So we are looking into this. For now, we just use scalp hair, but all we need is 1 or 2 strands, and they just need to be about 1 centimeter long. I would say 99% of the world's population can participate.
And how does it work?
Great question. Essentially, what's the day in the life of a hair strand at our lab at Linus? You sign up on our website, few simple questions. Honestly, it shouldn't take you more than 1 or 2 minutes to sign up. We send you a kit with instructions, and the kit includes a tube. All you need is some household scissors, and you clip some hair close to your scalp. I always tell people, if it's taking you more than 30 seconds, you're overthinking it, because it is the simplest thing you'll ever do. If you have children and they don't want to participate, you can clip their hair while they're sleeping. Put it in the tube. We give you a prepaid express courier envelope. You just put it in that, and it'll get shipped back to us. Within 2 working weeks, you will get a detailed profile of several elements. These elements include the essential nutrients like zinc and copper and the such, but also the toxic elements that can be really bad for you, like lead and arsenic and many others. But we give you a daily profile over a month. All of this is done from the comfort of your house. You get the report sent to you electronically, including the action items.
Does the use of hair products or things like permed hair make a difference?
For the most part, no, but we do tell people cut it close to the scalp, and we just need 1 centimeter close to the scalp. And that part is usually not very dyed and hasn't been heat treated. I have daughters and I see them straightening their hair. Heat is more of a concern than just some simple coloring. So, when you straighten your hair, you don't go right to the scalp because you might burn yourself. So we always collect the 1 centimeter close to the scalp. However, if you're using some very strong chemicals or something else, we ask you to wait a month, because you will grow a new centimeter every month. And we just said, look, wait a month, and then you can send us the new fresh hair.
When this test takes place, what does the presence of the elements show, and how does that become useful?
That's a great question, Jim. And to answer that, let's take a step back. You mentioned you're in Scotland, I'm in the US, and I think the situation is the same all over the world. If we ask people, what environmental exposures do you monitor in your house? The honest answer is nobody really measures much. You're measuring your household temperature through your thermostat. I'm sure you have a fire alarm, so it's trying to sense for carbon monoxide, but it's not really monitoring anything. It's just saying, okay, there's a fire, so it's a yes and no thing. But it's not telling you on a regular basis, these are the chemicals you're exposed to. Yet we get exposed to hundreds of chemicals every day in our home. So this is the first step, Traced, and the first version of Traced that empowers people to say, hey, step 1, we'll actually give you a deep profile that is personalized to you, and not just on one day, over the past month. And if you become a member, we do this test quarterly. So you're really mapping your exposures for the whole year, because once we have 4 months, we've got a pretty good idea what you experience during a weekday versus the weekend. We know what you experience during the winter months versus summer months and so on. And then let's say we find certain things that are there using a lot of research, not just research done by us, but research done at the CDC, at the EPA, the US government agencies, major universities. We know certain chemicals move together. So when we see certain things, we say, to us, it seems like it's your water supply. How about you put in a reverse osmosis filter, right? And I'll give you another example. Sometimes we see things that are like, hey, this seems a lot like house dust. How are you making this barrier to dust from the outside and not coming in? Maybe take your shoes off. Are your window seals really secure? Are they just leaky? But I want you to appreciate one simple point. I have done lots of genetic tests on my kids and myself. But when I come home and I ask myself the question, okay, they found some little quirk, what do I do differently tomorrow? I have nothing that I can do differently. But with this test, the moment you get the report, we empower you to make changes to your lifestyle without the need of some specialist clinician, without getting on a wait list or spending a lot of money, without relying on a very cumbersome healthcare system. We say, look, you can do this yourself. At most, you might need a plumber, but look, I've installed my own reverse osmosis system. If I can do it, anybody can.
And would it cover things like people that smoke? Would that show up?
So in the second, that's an excellent question. The second version of trace that we will launch in a few months, we'll be measuring many more environmental exposures. So secondhand smoke, for example, even if you're not smoking, but somebody near you is. Pesticides that most likely are in your food, or some things that you use. Maybe you're going hiking and you're putting some mosquito or tick repellent, or maybe you're spraying your front lawn with some pesticide, or you're eating food that is contaminated. We all talk about things that leach out of microplastics. It's such a huge concern. It affects our hormones, our fertility, and even our mental health. These forever compounds that we call PFASs, they used to be on our Teflon non-stick frying pans. They're still there in paint. In many parts of America, we used to spray furniture with flame retardant, and that had a ton of these PFASs. So these exposures still happen everywhere. So we don't want to overload our customers. We want to give them bite-sized pieces, address certain changes, then move on to the next set of chemicals, and then we will address those changes and continuously monitor their environment. This will become, in my view, a lifelong partnership. I always tell my people, our customers and our clients, I'm the CEO of a company, but everyone's the CEO of their own household. You can make a lot of changes to your house to improve your well-being.
And you were mentioning quarterly. Is that the optimal interval?
Yeah, for the general public, at first, using this product, yes. However, if we find something that's quite elevated, what we then instruct people is, look, you need to now go and consult a healthcare product. This is not a diagnostic tool. This is an information tool. So it opens up the funnel to, do you need to go in for a deeper medical analysis? So I always want to clarify that. And then we could do this at a much more frequent interval. And once things have started coming down and they're looking steady, we could even reduce the frequency. So we want it to be really flexible, really personalized.
And I guess that by doing that, you can show changes over time.
That's the view. We can monitor you and say, look, you have this pattern of exposures every 5-6 days. Maybe it's the weekend that you're doing something, or you were high in this. We've started working with you. We've given you some advice and some guidance. Most of your exposures have come down, but maybe a couple are still stubborn. So let's take a deeper look. So the idea again is to keep analyzing their trends, keep making sure that all the bad exposures come down. And if we find some essential nutrients that are too low, that's when we say, look, maybe speak to a nutritionist, maybe go to your healthcare provider.
And can it be mapped relatively accurately in terms of days? Because if you're seeing spikes on certain days and a person goes to the gym on a Thursday and all of a sudden they have a spike on a Thursday, are you able to make those kind of correlations between what you're doing in your life and these results?
Yes. Absolutely. So we provide a daily profile. And to be clear to your listeners, depending on how you cut the hair, and we can be off on the edges. I might be saying you're starting on June 1st, but actually the signal starts on June 5th. But people are surprisingly good because they know their weekly habits. We are all creatures of habit, as they say. So if I say, look, there is a spike every 5 days, people are very good at saying, yep, every Thursday, like you said, I go to this gym. And in fact, this reminds me of an actual case where a person was going to a gym, a young male, which was in an area that was being, undergoing construction and everything. And they had an arsenic spike. And then in discussion with their parents, we figured out, yeah, it happens every 5-6 days. And that's the frequency when they're going there to play basketball. They're drinking the water out of the filter there. And let's see if we can put a stop to that.
Blood tests and other tests like urine tests, what is different about traced compared to other tests?
There's several different elements, but perhaps the biggest one is blood and urine tests are just a snapshot. And really, we need to analyze these patterns. Like in the case of that one person who's going to play basketball. If I just had a blood test and said, look, your arsenic levels are high, and I don't tell them They're only high every 5 to 6 days. They can't go down there and become the detective of their own exposure and figure out what's happening. The other thing is, as a father of teenage daughters, I myself have gotten those wellness blood tests done where I have to give like 7 tubes of blood, and I'll do it. But if I took my kids along, well, they'll do it the first time, but I won't be able to even drag them kicking and screaming for the second visit. And half my day is gone in organizing my family's wellness visit. So honestly, blood testing has become the realm of when you get sick, you get it done. But taking your entire family on this wellness journey, the cumbersome nature of getting blood testing done is a huge barrier. Plus, shipping blood, even if somehow you were able to collect it at home through a lancet prick or something like a finger prick, it requires freezing, it requires chemical reagents. Same thing with urine, you've got to freeze it, it's messy, and don't even get me started about stool testing. So these are all barriers to people being well. It's like saying someone, here's access to the gym, but you've got to walk 30 minutes, slay a dragon, cross a river, and that's when you get to your gym. No one's going to go to that gym, right? So we're just trying to make it really easy.
Do you see this eventually being something like the same way that you would take a vitamin every day, that you have a test every couple of months and it just becomes a routine?
Exactly. And my vision is that hair testing will become the standard of care. It's like if you walk into a room of 100 people and you say, how many of you have had a blood test? Almost every hand will go up. I want to walk into a room one day and say, how many of you have had a hair test done? And I want every hand to go up.
And hopefully that will happen. In terms of the payment for this, do you envisage that this is something that is going to be so useful that it will be paid for by either in Canada and Europe by the healthcare system?
Private insurance or government. I do. Look, many European countries and even some employer programs will cover things that 50 years ago we would have thought impossible. Now we cover acupuncture for fertility in some employer programs, and massage is covered in some countries. Even therapy, just talk therapy from a psychologist, and now most insurance programs cover that. So absolutely, that day is not that far away because people are demanding this. And that's the ultimate power, that's what moves our government and our policies, is when citizens start speaking up saying, this is important for our health. And let's face it, no developed nation is able to afford the current healthcare system. It is so expensive, especially the United States. We have the least return on investment of any developed country for every dollar we spend on healthcare. Generations are now sicker than their parents and their grandparents. So something has to change. And for me, my personal mission is that this is a tool for that change.
And do you see it being used? Obviously, it's a picture of health, but do you see it being used in a preventative scenario in the future?
Absolutely. The sooner we find out that you've been exposed to something that could be harmful, or you're deficient or you're low on certain essential nutrients, and the sooner you fix that, stop that toxic exposure, the less likely you are to actually develop a disorder or reach ill health. And that's the ultimate vision of prevention. Let's catch things early before they become a problem. For me, a success would be someone comes to me one day and says, look, I was high on these 7 things. I've used your test for the past year. Now I'm low on everything. I'm going to reduce my frequency to just instead of 4 times a year, just twice. Great. I'm very happy. That's where I want to get to. I want to get to my customers saying to me, I'm going to be less reliant on this because you've helped me reach a state of health and well-being. And so I have achieved what I set out to do.
The test, does it show simply presence or does it show amount?
We show you the whole trend, whether you're elevated, what we call medium, which means you're pretty much like everybody else, or low. Now, low on an essential nutrient is a bad thing, and elevated on a toxic substance is also a bad thing. So and we provide the interpretation for that. But this is not just a yes and no test, it's a quantitative analysis of your pattern over time.
And is this something that your customers are using in conjunction with their physicians to help with treatments or to help diagnose?
That's entirely up to the customer. Our job is to provide the information. We clarify that this is not a diagnostic tool. This is an informational tool. This empowers you to understand your environmental exposures. However, if they find something high, they should go to their medical practitioner and then jump into that healthcare system. So we are really the sort of the shepherds. We are providing the information. We are giving them advice on how to improve their environment. But ultimately, they need to also have the freedom to use this information in the manner that they see fit.
Do you eventually see this as being something that rolls out in every country in the world?
That is the vision. That is the reason I spent over a decade developing this science. It has to happen. We all talk about climate change. We all talk about environment. Our research shows us, whether it's Alzheimer's or Lou Gehrig's disease or autism or just longevity, sleep quality, environment seems to be doing more than your genes. Just like a large part of the world's population now have access to genetic testing, whether they're just testing their ancestry or looking for some marker, they have to have access to their environmental map. So in a very optimistic sense, this is inevitable. It has to happen.
And what about situations where people are either low-income families that can't escape from a certain element or a certain toxin? I mean, it's all right saying, this is the problem that you have. If you're in an environment where you can't change that, how do you deal with that, I guess?
Absolutely. For the large part, we provide guidance that is accessible. And that was something by design. We all put our brains together and said, if I identify a problem, but the solution isn't accessible, what's the point of identifying the problem? Just create more worry. And that's why we say, look, most of the changes we are recommending collectively, you're going to only spend $500, at least around the parts that I'm living. Reverse osmosis filters are just a few $100s now, even cheaper if you get some that are desktop and the such. We tell you, hey, look at your vacuum cleaner, right? The difference between a vacuum cleaner that is just a regular filter, which has no certification, no real quality control, versus a HEPA filter isn't that much. And so the guidance we are giving is purposely designed that you can do this yourself. At most, you might have to go and click on an online shopping site and buy something, but this is not thousands of dollars worth of complicated genetic therapy. This is a few $100s that you can do, and you can do it in a stepwise manner. And we will prioritize things for you. In our report, we actually say this is higher priority than this. So people get action information that they can say, I'm going to do this first.
And I guess that ties in with prevention being more important than cure. If you spend a couple of £100 fixing something, if you don't fix it, then the long-term economic cost is even higher, I guess.
For me, it's a matter of almost shame. In the US, one of the biggest reasons of bankruptcy is your healthcare bill. So, by keeping you out of the healthcare system, keeping everyone healthy, that is a huge thing where we live, because healthcare has become so expensive. And it's like you said, ounce of prevention is better than a lot more of cure. But the reality of our healthcare system is we actually don't cure most diseases. We treat them, but we actually have the cure for most conditions. First of all, it's only very few, and it's very, very expensive, and it's inaccessible. So for me, the whole purpose is to develop and grow this field of precision preventive environmental medicine.
Is this a test that you will continue to develop, and do you see it evolving over time to include other elements, other compounds?
Absolutely. Initially, we're releasing this bite-sized piece of about 15 elements. This includes toxic metals, essential nutrients. In our next iteration, we will include compounds that are like coming out of microplastics, pesticides, forever compounds like PFAS and the such. And we'll keep growing the technology and offering more and more guidance. And what happens then is, once a person gets the baseline test done, they have a good map of what are their exposures. And then we can prepare advice and exposure guidance for them specific to their exposure map.
And I guess we were talking earlier about forest fires, things like that must have an effect on the body. And I guess you can say to people, well, these are the times you shouldn't be going out, or how to deal with that?
As we are talking, New York, the skies have turned orange because of the fires in Canada. In fact, yesterday, Chicago had the worst air quality of any city in the world, all because of the fires coming over from Canada. At this time, the last thing on people's mind is to go get a blood test done. And what would that blood test show you? Because it doesn't give you your history. So we are offering people help, saying, after the fires have subsided and air quality is better, we will send you a kit. Collect the kit from the comfort of your home. No need to go out in the polluted air. And we can track the last month's history. We can track your levels before the fire started, and then over the last week when you were experiencing all this smoke. So you know what's entered your body. It's not just a snapshot of, hey, you seem to be at this level, but I have nothing to compare you with. No, we can show you the trend. And maybe it's good news that your exposures did not go up, or your windows were keeping all the smoke out. You had HEPA filters. Your water was not contaminated. Great news. But if it was, then at least you know what's going on. And that's exactly what we have done with communities in California. We've helped people who are affected by what's been known as the Palisades fire. Dozens of families have used this test to go back in time, understand what they were exposed to. Many of them had to leave their homes and move into temporary accommodations. Did their exposures come down there? Now that they have returned home and are cleaning up their fire-affected homes, are their exposures going up? So this technology can help everyone in their daily life, but also during disaster scenarios, whether it's a fire, whether it's a chemical spill. The applications are only limited by our imagination.
And are you then able to make suggestions as to, the best ways to deal with if you've got smoke in your house, or are you able to say, well, if you put filters in, if you do this, that, and the other?
Absolutely. And that's not just based on what research we have done. It's based on years of great research at good universities, government-funded research. Having a HEPA filter, air filter system in your house can be very beneficial, especially on polluted days. If you have some respiratory complication, if you have asthma, for example, it becomes even more important for you to maintain your indoor air quality. Let's remember all these apps that are measuring air pollution, they're measuring what's outside your house. But most of the air we breathe is on the inside. So yes, I'll go out for a couple of hours every day, but the other 22 hours I'm spending indoors, either at work or in my home. So what is the air quality where I spend most of my time? And the reality is we have no idea. So again, this helps us get to that.
Do you envisage, because of that work component, that employers will be using this as well?
Absolutely. I envisage a day when this will be part of everyone's employer wellness program. So many big companies in the US will offer you fertility wellness programs as a part of your incentives. They'll offer you access to or memberships to gyms, to therapists. Why not this? The benefits are proven when it is so low cost, and it doesn't require you to take an hour off work to go get a blood test done. As an employer, what I see is, hey, I don't want my employees to get sick. That costs a lot more. It's like what you said. So I rather give them the healthiest environment possible, so that I'm not paying right from the ergonomic chairs they sit on, so that I'm not paying for back pain therapy, to the air they breathe, to to their healthy environment. And same thing as an employee, that's what I experience, because employers are now realizing it's too expensive to let your employees get sick, because first of all, you cover the healthcare costs, but then they get time away from work, so the loss in productivity. Everyone agrees the best thing is to keep your employees healthy. For everyone to be healthy, you get more work done. And imagine the goodwill you get, the loyalty and the passion you get from your employees when you offer them something like this. Hey, I don't need to do this, but this is cutting edge technology. I'm going to give it to you because I really care about your well-being.
And I guess that there's also the other side of that, is that if there is an employer that has issues with the building that they're in, they could maybe just turn around and say, you know what, this is not conducive to a good work environment. We're going to move.
Exactly. We're well past those early days of the Industrial Revolution when human beings were exposed to unimaginably toxic environments. People were losing years of their lives, and we are well past those. Now we have a much healthier relationship between employer and employee. Everybody wants to be healthy together. And even the building owner in your example would want to know, like, oh, because now you can make changes, the technology exists. My house is 120 years old. Where my children live, if the paint is peeling, I'm the first one to say, hey, this house probably has lead. I got to make sure the paint never peels. The apartment and other situations, well, there I have a landlord. And the landlord is saying to me, you let me know if the paint is peeling, because I don't want to lose you as a tenant. So whether you are a house owner or whether you're a tenant, I think this is a win-win situation.
Been talking about employers, but the education system as well. The last thing that schools want is for students to be sick. So,
and it's been shown, reduce these exposures like lead exposure, and the IQ of an entire generation improves. More than not getting students sick is we want our students to be as smart as possible. If nothing else, do it for selfish reasons. I always joke, because those students are the ones whose tax dollars is going to pay for your retirement. So keep those students smart and healthy, so that they're all wealthy, and then you get to retire in a nicer nursing home.
And also the schools look good if all of the tests are good.
Yes,
so
absolutely. I think schools should get a credit when all the tests come back low for doing a good job. And you heard about situations like the Flint water crisis. I also helped the region on southern Los Angeles with the Exide battery plant using a similar technology of looking back at exposures. So we can use this core technology to really have a global impact, a universal impact on people's health. Again, it's so accessible. This is not a $10,000 genetic test or some massive screen where you have to go sit inside an MRI with an empty stomach. This is something you barely spend a few minutes on, but it will, repay you with a lifelong of better health.
And are there other things that you're working on other than Traced?
The last time we talked about our early life autism test, and that's always something that's very close to my heart. I have a child who's neurodiverse. This test can also help autistic families. If you have an autistic individual, all these polluting elements that we experience, including the bush or the wildfires that we are experiencing now, they're going to have a bigger impact on their health. And many families who have an autistic child have reached out to us for something like this. Combine this with your autism test, which is known as Clear Strand ASD. Combining that with Traced allows us both to get the early diagnosis, start therapy, but also to improve our environment, which only bolsters the therapy. So we're going to keep adding different parts of the puzzle together to, again, the ultimate picture is one of better health for everyone, whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse. I would just again reiterate what I've said, that environment is very important for your health. So whoever is listening to this, just remember, you can't change your genes, but you can change your environment. So let us help you do that.
Definitely a great idea there from LinusBio, and that product again is called Traced, and in my opinion something that's really needed, and I'm sure it will make a big difference. And so that's it for this week's podcast. If you do want to get in touch with guest opportunities, or if you want to advertise, please do feel free to contact us at jim@deeptechdigest.com. And so until next time, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.